In 1924, when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he based it to a large degree on his experience in World War One and the conclusions he drew from them. In Mein Kampf, we find a lot of criticism as to how that war was fought and blaming unrest at home as a betrayal of the fighting soldiers at the front and thus for the defeat, whereas Mein Kampf was written more than 15 years before World War II started. Within the book can be found many warnings about how that war would be fought. From Hitler's perspective, a new major war was not a possibility, but a historical inevitability. In Mein Kampf, he presented human history as an unending struggle for survival, in which moral restraint and humanitarian ideals were not merely irrelevant, but actively destructive. In his view, humanity was a deceptive concept that weakened peoples in moments of existential crisis. When survival was at stake, only the instinct of self-preservation mattered. All other considerations, including ethics, law, and compassion, were destined to collapse. War in this framework was not an aberration, but the natural condition of human existence, and peace was a temporary illusion that led to degeneration. This worldview underpinned Hitler's central geopolitical doctrine, the acquisition of Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe. In Mein Kampf, he argued that it was intolerable for some peoples to possess vast territories, whilst others were crammed together on insufficient land. He rejected the idea that Germany's future lay in overseas colonial expansion, which he regarded as both unrealistic and outdated. Instead, he insisted that Germany must seek contiguous settlement territory on the European continent itself. The direction of expansion, he stated explicitly, could only be eastward, primarily into Russia and the territories under its control. Hitler portrayed this policy as a continuation of what Germany should have already done in the First World War. In his retrospective account, the empire had erred by pursuing colonial fantasies rather than recognizing the true strategic necessity of land conquest in Europe. Unlike earlier imperialist ambitions, this new expansion would not be commercial or political, but racial and demographic. German settlers would permanently occupy conquered land, while the indigenous population would be reduced to a subordinate labor force or displaced altogether. From the outset, Hitler envisaged that this future war as a war of plunder and exploitation. The conquered territories were to be stripped of their agricultural output, raw materials, and mineral wealth. Economic extraction was not the byproduct of conquest, but its primary purpose. Subjugated populations were to be reduced to a pool of coerced labor serving German needs. Heinrich Himmler later articulated the administrative logic of this vision. The eastern populations would become a leaderless workforce, annually supplying Germany with laborers for agriculture, road construction, quarrying, and other forms of hard labor. A central component of this system was deliberate intellectual suppression. Both Hitler and Himmler insisted that the non-German population of the East must be denied education beyond the most rudimentary level. Himmler stated explicitly that schools should teach no more than basic arithmetic, the ability to sign one's name, and obedience to Germans as a supposed divine command. Reading itself was considered unnecessary. Hitler echoed the view, warning that literacy would allow brighter individuals to acquire historical knowledge and political consciousness, which would inevitably be directed against German rule. Ignorance in this conception was a tool of domination. Hitler was under no illusion that such objectives could be achieved peacefully. He insisted that only force, specifically the power of a victorious sword, could secure the future he envisioned. War, therefore, was not a contingency to be avoided, but an instrument to be prepared for methodically. The seizure of political power within Germany was merely the first step. Once opposition was eliminated and society brought under control, the population had to be psychologically conditioned for war. Education, propaganda, and youth organizations were mobilized to normalize the expectation of future conflict. Even school curricula were reshaped so that essays and lessons increasingly revolved around war, sacrifice, and national destiny. In foreign policy, Hitler proceeded incrementally, making his ultimate objectives behind seemingly limited revisions of the Versailles system. Withdrawal from the League of Nations, the reintroduction of conscription, rapid rearmament, and the remilitarization of the Rhineland were not isolated acts, but calculated steps, each designed to test the resolve of other powers while strengthening Germany's strategic position. None of these measures represented the end goal. Each was a prerequisite for the next phase. This logic was formalized in August 1936 with the four-year plan memorandum. Hitler declared that Germany was overpopulated and incapable of feeding itself within its existing borders. The final solution, or the total solution as he phrased it at the time in economic terms, lay in territorial expansion. He set two non-negotiable directives. The German armed forces were to be operational within 4 years, and the German economy was to be capable of sustaining war within the same period. Rearmament and economic mobilization thus became inseparable. The ideological continuity between Mein Kampf and policy became unmistakable on the 5th of November 1937 during a secret meeting in the Reich Chancellery, attended by a small circle of senior political and military leaders. Hitler insisted that the discussion was too important to be held before the full cabinet. What he presented was essentially a statement of his earlier worldview. Germany's future depended on solving its space problem, and such expansion could only occur through the use of force. History, he argued, demonstrated that no territory was ever unclaimed. Expansion necessarily meant breaking resistance and confronting existing powers. The only remaining questions were timing and method. Hitler stated unequivocally that Germany must solve its territorial problems no later than 1943 to 1945. What marked a significant shift at this meeting was Hitler's attitude towards Britain. Whereas Mein Kampf had still entertained the possibility of an alliance with Britain to facilitate eastern expansion, Hitler now made clear that German objectives would be pursued even if this meant war with Britain and France. This realization caused shock amongst those present. Foreign Minister Konstantin von Neurath, War Minister Werner von Blomberg, and Army Commander Werner von Fritsch all warned that Hitler gravely underestimated British and French military power. Neurath, deeply shaken, sought his dismissal, unwilling to bear the responsibility for what he recognized as a path towards general war. Their resistance proved futile. Within months, Blomberg and Fritsch were removed through manufactured scandals, clearing the way for Hitler to consolidate control over the armed forces and pursue a more aggressive course. In March 1938, German troops marched into Austria, completing the Anschluss without resistance. Almost immediately, Hitler turned to his next objective, Czechoslovakia. Exploiting ethnic tensions within the multinational state, Hitler focused on the approximately 3 million ethnic Germans living in the Sudetenland. He invoked the principle of national self-determination while simultaneously assuming Europe that this was Germany's final territorial demand. In a speech at the Berlin Sportpalast on the 26th September 1938, he declared that the Sudeten question was the last problem Germany needed to resolve. These assurances proved deliberately deceptive. No sooner had the Sudetenland been annexed than the regime escalated both internally and externally. On the 9th of November 1938, synagogues burned across Germany during the pogrom known as Kristallnacht. The following day, Hitler instructed the German press to prepare the population for the idea that objectives were not achievable by peaceful means. and they would have to be secured by force. The era of pacifist rhetoric, he declared, was over. In March 1939, the final dismantling of Czechoslovakia followed. President Emil Hacha was summoned to Berlin and subjected to intense psychological pressure. Hitler presented him with an ultimatum: submit or face invasion. During the meeting, Hacha suffered a heart attack and had to be revived by a physician before being compelled to sign a declaration placing the fate of his country in the hands of the Führer. Within hours, German troops occupied Prague. This act shattered any remaining illusions in London and Paris. On the 31st of March 1939, Britain and France issued security guarantees to Poland, recognizing that it would likely be the next target of Nazi German aggression. Their fears were justified. Hitler had never abandoned the objectives he'd outlined in Mein Kampf. On the 1st of September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, triggering the Second World War. On the 22nd of June 1941, the German army launched its invasion of the Soviet Union, a campaign conceived from the outset not merely as a military conflict, but a war of annihilation designed to destroy states, peoples, and entire ways of life in pursuit of Hitler's ideological vision, which he had outlined in Mein Kampf all those years earlier. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every day at 2000 hours Central European time because I live in Poland and in Germany. I also do longer videos such as this one on Tuesdays and Fridays. On other days I do a short video of up to 3 minutes in length. I also offer channel membership. Membership costs €6, $6 or £5 per month, and now gives you access to more than 800 members only films. But for the moment, thanks for listening. I've also done a video on Mein Kampf and the First World War, and I'm about to prepare a video on Mein Kampf and Operation Barbarossa. For the moment, bye for now.